Hello, can you hear me? Oh, is it going straight to the? I see. Who's navigating? Who's online? Are you doing it? Yoaz, okay. If whoever's there's a way to communicate if there's questions or anything coming from online. That would also be good to know, because I don't know who's present online. Okay, okay, all right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعليه الطيبين المطهرين وأصحاب الصالحين. Okay, so we're going to get started on kind of what to expect. So these are some of the topic headings that we're going to try to cover a little bit tonight, inshallah. So self-awareness, which I feel like is like really actually is a huge part of it. It's like knowing yourself is really honestly like half of the journey towards like preparing for marriage, or even more than half, is like gaining more self-knowledge, more self-awareness. You're doing yourself a huge service, and you're doing your potential future spouse a huge service as well by just getting in touch with who you are, what's important to you, what you value, what your life purpose and vision is. All of these things make the process of getting married much easier. And included in self-awareness, we can talk about like self-development, self-growth is all kind of interconnected with that. We'll talk about issues about Islam, culture, finances, home life, family and in-laws, friends, having kids, how to engage community as a married couple, and then rights and responsibilities. Probably won't get into the nitty-gritty of that, but I'll have some resources for if people want to explore that kind of on their own more in depth. There's good scholarly resources out there and even classes that people can take on knowing their Islamic rights and responsibilities, inshallah. So starting out with self-awareness, I'm just going to check real quick to see, make sure Doa isn't trying to message me or anything. I have no idea who's online. Anyways, Doa, if you are listening out there and navigating those who are virtual, I have my phone next to me, so if you wanted to message me with any questions that do come through, or let me know how many people are present, that can be helpful, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So first is like knowing why. Like why do we want to get married? We'll look a bit at that, and then setting our intention. Know the who, like who am I? We talked about the importance of self-knowledge. What are your needs and values? Knowing your own temperament and personality, your communication style, attachment style, your love language. All these things are useful and helpful to know. And knowing the what, knowing the rights and responsibilities of marriage. And then knowing the how. How do we actually go about getting married? You know, as single individuals, how do people navigate that? Different options for doing that through various connections, matrimonial events, social gatherings, online, etc. So we're going to start with the why. Why do you want to get married, right? So we start with intention setting, and it's always good to try to connect our intentions to something noble and something higher than just kind of some of the ego desires, which, you know, they have their place, but to kind of connect our intentions to something of a sacred element becomes really important. And so we're always kind of bringing it back to, well, let's look at the Quran and let's look at the authentic prophetic sunnah to kind of get some guidance on this as well. So one of the intentions can be as a means, marriage can be a means to draw nearer to Allah. It's a way of fulfilling a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and completing half your deen. Many of you, I'm sure you've heard about the hadith about marriage is half your deen, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's one of the intentions that people will set, right, to kind of connect it to something sacred. You can also set the intention to refine your character, because marriage can actually be a field where you get to work on your nafs, right? We all have our stuff, and marriage provides us with a mirror that kind of reflects back some of the things and some of the ways that we are. So it's an opportunity for us to actually improve our character. Another one is to increase numbers. Some people have the intention of having children through marriage as well, right? There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says that go forth and essentially procreate, so that I'm paraphrasing. So the numbers of my ummah will be a source of pride on the day of judgment, right? And then another intention could be to raise God-conscious children with good character, right? So you're setting the intention to actually have people raised on the Quran and the prophetic tradition, and being good stewards of the earth and cultivating the earth, and being, a contributor of love and service to Allah's creation. Another one could be to cultivate joy, gratitude, tranquility, right? These are things that in a healthy marriage, they do engender these positive aspects and virtues. And then lastly, it's also a permissible outlet for the human sexual desire, right? It's natural, it's a part of marriage. Islam's never really shied away from that. There's other spiritual and religious traditions that have a hard time with that, but in Islam, it's actually understood and normalized and considered to be an important part of marriage. So all of these are actually good intentions, right? They're all good intentions, and we're connecting them to something sacred, or connecting them to ways of also making sure that we're living in accordance with our principles as Muslims. Any questions, thoughts, or things that come up around just intentions and intention setting? Continue. Okay. So people often will ask, how can I actually get to know myself a little bit better? So there's a few things that people can do proactively to get to know themselves. One is just like through the course of your life experiences are going to actually teach you a lot. So being tuned in and plugged into the trajectory of your life, experiences that you have, getting feedback on your strengths and weaknesses, all of that is helpful. You're also going to have teachers in your journey, various teachers. You might have people that help you in school that are actually maybe people of wisdom that help you to learn who you are. Or you may have a coach, or you may have an Islamic teacher, or you may have like an Arabic teacher, whatever it is, but you're going to have people in your journey that are going to help you to understand who you are. Also going through difficulties. To be honest, the times where I've really grown the most, or coming out of or working through some kind of a hardship. Like because you're tested, you're challenged, and you get stronger going through it, right? If you're able to go through it and persevere, you're coming out actually more than you were before. You're stronger, you have more perspective, you have more experience, right? So that's just, we call it post-traumatic growth. Like if people are going through traumatic things, you get through it, you get back up, you're able to deal more, you've taken on more. There's growth that can come from that, right? If it's done with the proper attitude. Self-reflection, so just actually taking time to reflect on yourself. So especially in our day-to-day, like a lot of people are busy, distracted, but it is really important to sometimes just take some time for yourself, right? Especially, as young adults, I really encourage having a process of journaling. When you're having thoughts and emotions come up, just get it out sometimes, and just get curious about, I wonder why I'm feeling this way, or I wonder why I reacted that way to this thing. What's coming up for me? Also being in touch with teachers and elders, people of wisdom. So consulting others. We're encouraged in our deen to actually have shura, to actually have consultation, and getting feedback also from people. It's one thing to have people around you that always tell you how nice you are and how great you are and everything like that, but it's actually very valuable to have people that will also be able to point out your flaws and your mistakes and your rough edges to help you grow and clean that up a little bit. Obviously, in a respectful, nice way, but it's helpful to have people that will tell us the honest truth as well. And then people can also take different archetype tests or do reading of different books and things like that actually have, can give perspectives. Like, so, you know, what temperament are you? Or what is your particular personality that's developed over time? These things are useful to like understanding yourself and how you respond and react in different scenarios, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and some of your unique characteristics. Right? All of that can be helpful. And then also solitude, like sometimes having, in addition to balancing time with others and engaging with others and having people reflect things back to you, also having time alone can be valuable, right? Where we actually sit with ourselves and kind of see what tends to kind of bubble up to the surface when we quiet everything else down. What was that? No? Okay. I take one beep as just something happened. Okay, as long as it's not going on. Yeah, and just getting curious about your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and paying attention to it. So like having like a way of observing these rather than just kind of being, just kind of feeling like they're just waves that overtake us and we're just kind of going with it, but actually being able to have a little bit of distance from our emotional processes and thought processes to be able to see them, right? As well as our physical sensations. Right? Talk more about that. Any more questions or anything around this about self-knowledge? So I mentioned archetype tests. There's several things out there now, and there's many, many things actually out there now. I've put up here a few things for temperaments, the Enneagram, love languages, attachment style, the Big Five personality test, and then different ones that kind of look at masculine and feminine principles. So a little bit about these. The two that I like the most are actually the four temperaments and the Enneagram. The reason that I like these is because they're actually time-tested. They're actually ancient modalities of self-knowledge that have been used for centuries. And there's a reality to them. And the Muslims actually have taken them on and incorporated that in their learning systems in the classical period, right? Especially with the four temperaments, which people attributed to the Greeks. If you actually look at the history, it actually goes even further back to the ancient Egyptians. And then the Greeks kind of took it up. And then the Muslims actually kind of took it up and really developed it into their system of wellness and medicine and personality, knowing the psyche of the self. We can talk more about the four temperaments, but essentially there's four basic types, and they relate to the qualities of being, one type of a temperament. The sanguine temperament is warm and moist, and the choleric temperament is hot and dry, and the melancholic temperament is cold and dry, and the phlegmatic temperament is cold and wet. So these are like types of people that you'll see that will manifest certain qualities and characteristics, sometimes even physically, but more in the emotional sense. And they tie into these qualities of even the seasons, right? They'll relate to the seasons. They'll relate to even substances. So it's an interesting way to kind of look at the person and kind of getting to know your own temperament, your dominant and subdominant temperament can be helpful. And then the Enneagram is like a 9-part personality test. Different from the temperament. The classical idea of the temperament is that your constitutional temperament doesn't change. It's God-given. You're born with it. It's what you have. You can refine yourself within your temperament, but your actual temperament will never change. Enneagram is more like the constructed and the developed personality that forms as a result of a combination of things. Combination of our constitution, with our life circumstances, with the family that we were raised in, and the society, and all the experiences that we had. And by early childhood, we form a kind of an ego structure and a personality. Enneagram's a really good one to like, I feel like it really holds up like a mirror to our faces. Shows us the good things, but it also shows the things that like we don't really like. It kind of forces you to look at some of those things. So I really like the 4 temperaments in the Enneagram. But then there's a bunch of other things that are just also useful, like knowing how do you feel loved in relationship. What is it that makes you feel like special and cared for, right? So some people, they like quality time. They really value that more than anything else. There's other people that like getting gifts. There's other people that like physical touch. There's other people that like words of affirmation, etc. So there's different ways that people feel this love in relationships. So it's good to know your own, good to know also the love languages of those around you as well. There's also attachment style tests that can tell you, how do you relate to people in relationship? Are you somebody that is very secure and you have a healthy balance of being able to be in connection and relationship with somebody and be on your own, and you don't feel any kind of agitation in that? Or do you tend to be somebody that feels anxious if somebody seems to be pulling away or not spending enough time with you? Or do you tend to be avoidant? Like when people get too close to you, you tend to pull away, or you feel like you need more space, right? So the attachment style test can give you a little bit of insight into your relational processes, and also, it's really helpful for understanding conflict too. In particular, when I work with couples, I will explore attachment with my couples because they're showing up in conflict in a certain way. And oftentimes you'll see in a relationship, like somebody's the pursuer, somebody's the avoider. Somebody wants to like deal with it right away and fix things, and another person's like, no, like I need space, time, or I don't want to deal with this right now. And there's a place for both of them, but you want to find a balance of like engagement and then giving time and space. So that attachment style test can be useful. There's the Big 5 personality. I don't use that as much, but it can be useful to kind of just understand your flexibility versus your kind of rigidity on things. It can be how open-minded you are versus kind of you like more structure and things. So it's a unique one that kind of can give you more insight. And then understanding masculine and feminine principles. So this is different from sex or gender. These principles relate to more qualities, right? And because both men and women, we all have a combination of masculine and feminine principles. Even the Prophet, like he's called, Nabil Umi, which means that, some people say the unlettered, the unlettered Prophet, but it also means like it can mean the motherly or like the nurturing, and he had a strong amount of rahmah in his being, right? And rahmah is a feminine quality, right? Rahim is the womb, right? Rahman, Rahim, they come from Rahim, that word, and it comes from womb. It's a feminine reality to that. So there's this, a man can have feminine qualities, and a woman can have masculine qualities, and it's not a problem as long as they're still rooted in their manhood or womanhood. Right? Our mother Aisha, radiallahu anha, she was actually, she had her aspect of like, masculine qualities, for example. Like she was a scholar in her own right. She was also very outspoken and active, and these are also masculine principles, right? So I don't want people to confuse it as like male-female. It's relating to principles, but these things are also, they'll trip people up in relationship and marriages when these things aren't always like discussed ahead of time about expectations, for example, how are we in relationship and what are the roles of different people and these kinds of things. There's not one way necessarily to do things. We have guidelines, in the Islamic tradition, but there's actually a lot of flexibility for couples to be able to find something that's going to actually work for their particular situation. But having a balance of these principles can, and understanding them can be useful. Okay. Any questions or comments so far? Yeah, yeah. Well, the scholars have used it as a way to understand. I'll give you an example. So Imam al-Ghazali, he's a 11th, 12th century scholar, one of the greatest scholars of our tradition. He said that he didn't feel like a teacher or a scholar should be engaging students without knowing the temperament of their student. Because how are you going to actually properly teach somebody if you don't know how that person learns, right? Because yeah, you know, a sanguine is going to be motivated very differently than somebody who's a choleric or a phlegmatic or melancholic. So the Muslims have used four temperaments. They used it in their medicine for health, but they also used it for understanding the personhood or the psyche of individuals. Yeah. Did you have like, I guess, a follow-up or something about that? Yeah, yeah. So you can find it in the especially in the classical period it was used, and it's been used for centuries in the Islamic tradition until I think it's kind of really fallen off the radar for a lot of people, I think, in the last century. But it's kind of always been there. It's still a useful tool to know. Very interesting way of understanding self and others. Yeah. They can be tools to assist in that process, right? It's good to do it ahead of time. I mean, if people come across this knowledge and it's good to find out, you know, what is my temperament? What's the temperament of my family members? You know, it's very helpful in relationships, and not just for marriage. I mean, if people have kids or they have brothers or sisters or parents, like very useful to know. Because we tend to do things the way we are, like how we want to be interacted with and how we respond to people, like we do with other people. But other people don't receive it necessarily the same way. So understanding temperaments can be useful to like even understand communication and yeah. I will say that like with four temperaments in the Enneagram, there's an online test. To be honest with you, like they're not necessarily that great. They might give you like an accurate result. They're still not going to tell you too much about it. It's actually better to like get a book and like go through it and really like understand it. And there's good books on the four temperaments that are very short, like people can do very quick readings of. Um, there's a Muslim Hakim in the UK. His name is Alexander Carberry, and he has books on the four temperaments that are short but very good, very solid. So if people are interested in that, they can check out, even if you put it into a search or something, Alexander Carberry, or Carberry Botanicals, I think is his website, and then you'll see his books on his website. Any other questions or anything on that one? Okay. Okay, so other ways of getting to know yourself better are understanding your strengths and weaknesses, right? And even asking people who are close to you in your life, family, friends, teachers that you maybe have that you trust, getting to know what do they see in you, right? It's good to do a self-inventory, but it's also good to see what do other people see. And asking, you know, what do they see about your likes and dislikes? What do other people think you value? It's also good to ask yourself these questions, but getting that feedback from what other people notice as well. Communication, asking about your communication. And then asking people like, what do they feel like you can learn or benefit from or be more aware of? You know, are there things that they would, you know, feedback they would give you or advice that they might give you? So again, going to trusted people. Go to people that have your best interest in mind. Some people will just, you know, be careful with who you go to. Some people just want to criticize you or something like that. Or go to people that actually have your best interest in mind. Okay. So next question is kind of like, am I ready to get married? And then how can I prepare for it? So first off, is asking some basic things. At a basic level, do you have the desire? I know it sounds kind of like redundant maybe, but one should have the desire to get married. I've seen people actually be in situations where they didn't have the desire to get married, but they felt the pressure from their family or society or whatever it was, and they were doing it because of that. Not really a good reason to get married. you're gonna run into some problems if that's the motivation. So, do you have the desire? Do you want to get married? Right. Two is like self-awareness. Self-awareness is a lifelong journey, so it doesn't stop, but certainly helpful to know more about yourself, know who you are, what you value, what your strengths are, weaknesses, what triggers you, how are you under stress, what are your self-regulation techniques, all those things. So yeah, I mentioned self-regulation. Also, asking the question about, do I have any addictions? Are any of them active, right? If they are, am I doing anything about it? Right? Am I doing anything to actively work through any addictions that I have? I have to say, because it's just it's a pandemic in our times, but I see a lot of men, right? And they're addicted to pornography, right? And it unfortunately it just erodes marriages, right? So a lot of people end up getting into marriage, they haven't dealt with it, it happens, wife finds out, then, lots of problems coming up, right? And some people want to work through it, other people are like, no, can't do this, and so, big issue, right? So, addictions can be a myriad of different things, but so asking oneself, am I working actively on getting over and working through these things? Ability to express one's needs, right? I think this is really important too, especially for the more introverted types. If you tend to be shyer, quieter, less assertive, you want to be able to make sure that you actually have the ability to say what you want, what you feel, what you need. It's going to be really important in a relationship. Because even people that feel like, oh no, I can take a lot, or I'm very self-sacrificial and I'm used to doing that or whatever, there will come a point where eventually you'll feel resentment building, right? If you're not actually expressing your needs and you're always holding it in, always being the giver and not actually being nourished in a relationship. So being able to work on that if that's a challenge for someone. And then having knowledge, right? I think absolutely have a basic knowledge of your Islamic rights and responsibilities. And, asking yourself, do I have the ability to adhere to them, right? At a basic level, for men, being able to provide at a basic level is important, right? Man has to be able to provide, housing, clothing, food, at a basic minimum. Healthcare, according to some of the scholars, right? These basic needs, that's a kind of a must, right? So a man has to ask themselves that, right? A woman also asking, do I have the ability to be in a relationship, and how do I feel about intimacy? They have to be willing to be able to engage in some of the foundational things of marriage, right? So asking financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, am I actually prepared to be in a marriage? So any questions, thoughts, or things that are coming up for anyone around this? Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, obviously age is going to be a consideration because people are in different life circumstances. Like if people are in 19, 20, and I've seen this, people will sometimes get married and they actually have a good situation where maybe they have family support, and they are able to actually manage that and navigate it as they're trying to establish themselves professionally. That can be a possibility, right? But a person really has to ask that, do I have actually the support networks in place? And do I have supportive parents, and are the parents supportive of the marriage? Right? I think we get into tricky waters if parents aren't really on board with the marriage and they're not really approving or they're not supportive in things, people can get into kind of some sticky, challenging areas. You know, this is a challenge, I will say too, like the financial component is like people are getting married later sometimes because they're waiting to finish school, establish themselves. So this can be actually a challenge sometimes, like, and we see people sometimes delaying or waiting because of that, right? I think this is also like, it comes back to like people's situations and you know, scenarios. It's like people are in whatever life trajectory that they're in, and they have to be realistic about like the partner that they're going to go for too. Like, you know, so if somebody wants to have like, you know, a certain quality of life that's very high, requires a lot of financial giving, then, you know, well, maybe you shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't necessarily like be marrying somebody that's going to be a social worker and then waiting for them to like build up all their savings or whatever. It's just like not the right situation, right? But yeah, we can talk more about these things because and then I hear a lot of things on both sides. From women, I'll hear things about, you know, men not being prepared and these kind of things, and from men, I'll be like, oh, women want too high of a mahar and they're asking for this much, and it's like ridiculous. And so we can have that conversation if people want to go there. I don't know. It'd be good to hear from you all. What are you hearing, or what are you noticing among your friends and things around that conversation? But I see that coming up quite a bit. Any comments or questions so far around some of these? Is anybody here married other than Auntie Farah? You're engaged. Okay, mashallah. That's a good place to be. Yeah. So yeah, this is a great time to like prepare and everything. Mashallah. Anybody? Nobody else is married. Okay. So also asking self-reflective questions. Like we mentioned, can I identify, express, and manage my feelings? This is really important in communication in marriage. It sounds like basic, but sometimes you'll notice like people have different ways of reacting when they're under stress or when they're angry. Like some people explode, other people just bottle up and they shut down, right? And so you want to find a way to regulate and find like a healthy medium where you can express exactly what you're feeling, but in a way that's like calm, collected, and regulated, right? And that starts with being able to know it for yourself. Some people don't even know. They're reacting before they even really know why they're feeling the way that they are. Am I comfortable with commitment? If people have commitment issues, like, is that being sorted out? How do I feel about myself? Right, your own self-worth and esteem, right? It's really important that, you know, people have a healthy sense of self at a basic level when they're getting into marriage, right? Not that just looking for somebody else to kind of validate them and make them feel good, right? That they actually, on their own, they're feeling a sense of a healthy self. Are there problems in my life that I'm trying to escape? This is an important one because I've seen people, they are sometimes in very difficult home lives and they see marriage as like, this is my ticket out, right? This is my way of where I'm going to get free. And there might be a component to that that might be partially true, but it's not the best way to kind of approach it because you can't really run away from your problems. I guarantee you there's still things that are gonna come with you even as you move into marriage. So trying to work on like, how have I been affected by my family? Is there anything I need to heal and work through for myself to get into a place where I feel like I'm not just trying to like escape? Again, we mentioned addiction, so do I have any addictions or mental health issues that are not being addressed? If so, you know, seeking out to address some of those things. Again, that can be done with sometimes professionally, and sometimes it can be done with healthy peers or elders or something like that that are trusted. Am I able to assert my needs? Again, self-expression. Can I be honest with myself and others, right? Sometimes people get into, you know, patterns of engaging that are sometimes suboptimal. They don't always tell the truth, or they hide the truth, right? Or they're very fearful of telling the truth in certain circumstances. So, that's important, as well as like being honest with yourself about what you like, what you don't like, what you're willing to compromise on, what you're not willing to compromise on, right? Be honest with yourself. Like, this is the dangers of like infatuation that happens sometimes. Is like people meet somebody, they're like so enamored by them, but they're not able to like be realistic about maybe the red flags that they're seeing. Even though other people in their life are saying, "Hey, did you notice like he kind of lost his temper with the waitress there?" Or did you see him do this or that, or like, why did he talk to you that way? And a person just can't see it because they're just enraptured, and so being able to be honest with yourself, not having like rose-colored glasses on. Am I clear on what my deal breakers are? So this comes to values, and we'll talk more about values, but I really encourage people to, even before they're getting married, to like establish for yourself, what do you know you'll never agree to? Like, have those things that you can never be okay with, and have that down, right? Write it down for yourself. Because when you bump up against somebody, and you might really like them in some ways, but let's say they do that thing that you can't stand, you want to be able to have enough sobriety and discernment to be able to say no to that part of your nafs that wants to, because, mashallah, he's so attractive, or he's hafiz al-Quran, or whatever it is, right? You want to get clear on your own values. I really recommend that for people. And then asking, like, where's Allah in my life? Where are you on your own religious and spiritual journey in your path? A lot of times people know they want somebody that's a certain way. Well, what do you want for yourself, right? Where do you want to be? And are you working towards that? Okay. Any questions, comments around some of these questions? All right. Yeah. Well, deal breakers are like no compromise. Deal breakers are like the things that you wouldn't accept. Like your healthy, true self would never agree to. Like, let's say an example, like somebody is like, I know I'll never be in a marriage with somebody that drinks, right? And then you meet somebody and they're like, well, I still, I sometimes do it once in a while or something like that. And you're like, oh, they're only doing it once in a while. You don't want to waver on your like deal breakers. Deal breakers are the things like for yourself. You want to hold true to those things. So what are those things that you're unwilling to compromise on? Those are deal breakers. Then there's other things that are kind of in the gray area maybe. And that's a question about like, okay, these are some things that would be really great to have, but maybe I can compromise if I have enough of my core needs are there and they're established, and maybe some of my be good to have, but it's not like a must. Maybe I'm willing to compromise, but I still have to think about it. Right? You have to be honest with yourself in that process. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so marriage, it's a category, and like from a fiqh perspective, it's a sunnah, it's mustahab, it's good to do. It's a practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's part of our way of life. It's a good thing to do and implement and to seek, but it's not fard, right? So like, even if somebody didn't have the desire to get married, let's say for example, and they never did, and they were able to still control if they had urges or desires, if a person's in that situation, I mean, that is still ultimately a choice. They're not going to incur any sin. There's nothing upon them in that regard, right? It's not, they don't have to get married. It's a good thing to do and seek for most people, right? Some people will, I mean, this is the reality of life. There's a small minority of people that will not be able to get married in life for one reason or another, whether it's by self-choice or because they just weren't able to find somebody, there's no sin upon that person, right? There's no karaha on them at all, right? Yeah, it's better to don't settle on the deal breakers, like the things that you know, because you're going to end up getting into a lot of fights, or very unhappy, or losing your sense of self in the marriage, which I've seen happen for people. It's like over time. Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Yeah, does that help? I guess. Okay. Yeah. Yes. That's a really important point. That like perfection is not, it's not in the dunya, right? This is not the realm where you're going to find. There's no such thing as a perfect spouse, right? Even if they seem that way, very quickly in marriage you're going to notice things popping up that annoy you. You will. Like, there's nobody that's going to like hit all of those things, right? So being realistic, I think, is really important, and knowing that like you're not going to get everything that you want. You wanna settle into like, what are the things that I know I need to have for me, but realizing that like I'm not gonna get everything that I want. I had a client once. He was like going on when we were talking about the spouse that he wanted, and he's like going on. It's like color hair and the eyes, and I was like, whoa, man, like like this really like and like mashallah, like hafiz of Quran, and they're doing tahajjud, and but they're also really like beautiful and and like a supermodel, and yeah, it's just like it's not realistic. Some of so be like, live in reality too. Don't have unreal expectations, right? Perfection is absolutely not in this dunya, right? You're not going to get that. And more than anything, you want to find somebody of khuluq. You want to find somebody of character that is going to be, that you feel at ease with, that is compatible with you. That's going to be the most important thing. Yeah, that's a good question. This is where I say, talk to your trusted um, friends or elders, or for people that are working with like a professional, get some feedback, right? Like, so like, even the guy I was telling you about, I was working with, I had to tell him like, honestly, like, you gave me a whole list of things, and like, very unlikely that you're going to get all of those things. Just want to reflect that back to you, that like, you're gonna continuously be disappointed, but like, you can still, it's good to be, you should be attracted to somebody, but maybe you're not going to get the supermodel that you had envisioned in your mind, and like, that's okay. Like, what are the most important things? So I think talking to people in your life that can give you feedback on like, okay, I noticed you mentioned this and that. Those things sound like very reasonable, but like this one, I'm like, is that really like, tell me more about why that feels so important to you. They can peel back layers with you. So I think talking to people and getting nasiha and doing shura with people is a good thing. That's one way to kind of check yourself, of like, am I being realistic or not? But you want to go to people that you consider to be actually people of some kind of wisdom or perspective. Not just like, we all have that friend that. So yeah, just being careful with that. Okay. And then, anything else? Before we continue? How are we doing on time? Okay, mashallah, we still got an hour before Isha, right? Yeah, okay. So how to prepare? Identify your values. So this is something I'll even do with exercise with some of my clients. I'll be like, make like 3 huge concentric circles, and then in your core, put your like absolute things that you must need in that center, right? The things that again, you can think about it in 2 ways: the things that you must have, and the things that you absolutely cannot have, right? Because they go both ways. But the things that are your absolutes, like, that's going to be your core, right? And then the second layer is like the things that are like relatively important to you, but like, if it's not there, maybe I'm willing to compromise, right? If I find somebody really good that I'm connected to and I vibe with and all my core needs are there, maybe I can compromise some of the things on the second layer. And then the third layer is like the things that are like, they're nice to have, but like, I can definitely like, no issue. Like, if it's not there and they're a good person and they meet my core needs and many of my other things that I would like to have, those things that would just make it a lot sweeter, yeah, maybe I can pass on those things. So that's just a kind of like an exercise people can do to get a sense for themselves. And then engaging the people that you trust around, getting clarity on how realistic is that. Okay. Evaluate your personality traits and habits, right? So like, you know, knowing what are the things that like you notice in your friends or family members that, you know, people reflect back to you that are like, oh, they like really value about you, or like they appreciate, or the things that kind of annoy or they find annoying and things like that. You know, getting some perspective on those things. Refining your conflict resolution skills. So family's always like, you know, um, a playing field that we can engage where like conflict comes up, and how do you engage? You know, are you able to discuss and navigate conflict in still a way that feels like collected and regulated, where you don't get super out of control. You know, your anger doesn't overtake you, or that you just don't shut down and you just avoid it. Like, are you able to engage without being completely dysregulated? Learning to be flexible and patient. I think this is really important piece. Marriage is like two nafs coming together, right? And so we all have our like interesting ways and unique things, and somebody else is now doing things totally different than you. And you know, you're gonna be like, why are they doing it that way? Like, this way is so much better to do. Well, maybe not, you know, maybe it's just a different way of doing things or seeing things. And can you learn to be somewhat patient and flexible with some of these little things day to day? I find there's a lot of things on like daily life, house chores kind of things, and how people clean and cook, and, you know, expectations around that. So it's good to be flexible and patient. Right? And I say here, like, seek to serve, right? I always try to emphasize this piece when working with anybody in premarital, because it makes the whole thing so much easier when you're positioned with your attitude. And again, we'll do a disclaimer here. I'm talking about a healthy situation. It's good to be in a mindset of like, I want to serve this person, you know, for the sake of Allah. Like, this is actually like an opportunity for me to actually like be really good to Allah's creation and take care of them and make them happy. And when you enter into like, you know, people say like marriage is 50-50. No, it's not. It's usually never 50-50. At different times in life, it's going to go in different ways. And, you know, some people just do more too. Sometimes that's temperament, personality. But you want to be in the attitude of yourself, like, I want to give more. You know, I want to give more than what my spouse is going to give me. That's going to be a healthy place to be in any kind of a healthy general setting, right? Again, I put a caveat here with like, there's certain types of people that are givers. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, number 2 type, giver. Number 9 is also like the mediator and always kind of like passive, giving up their rights and things like that. If you're that type of a person that's always giving and you neglect yourself and you neglect your needs, you want to be careful. You want to be careful not to lose yourself in the relationship. And you want to be careful not to marry a narcissist. And I mean that seriously, because some people are just, they're more vulnerable to it, maybe because of their upbringing or something like that. So when I say seek to serve, I'm talking about generally speaking. I'm not talking about being in an unhealthy relationship where one person is just always taking and never giving, and they're just using that. And they know they married somebody who's a giver, and they're just having a field day with it. That's not what I'm talking about, right? So being careful, but generally speaking, in most dynamics, in healthy dynamics, seek to serve. Have that attitude of like, I want to contribute, I want to provide, I want to give comfort and care and all of that, and focusing on your own responsibilities rather than your rights. Don't think so much about your rights, think more about your responsibilities. And it's going to make the marriage so much easier, especially if both people are coming in with that attitude, then it's going to flow so nicely, inshallah. Right? Yeah, yeah, it's a major one. So yeah, asking self-reflective questions, which we covered. Study, people can prepare by learning, right? Self-knowledge, we've talked about that. Religious knowledge, right? Growing in your own religious journey, whether it's the rights and responsibilities of marriage, but also just generally speaking, like, are you cultivating your own self-development, spiritual development, and character refinement? I like to recommend Family and Youth Institute as a resource. Some of you may be familiar with them. They have a ton of good content on their website. And their marriage prep toolkit is really solid. Like, I've taken a look at the whole thing, and it's really quite good, right? So like, I always recommend premarital counseling for people because it's helpful to have a third-party person kind of being able to see your dynamic and pick out things that maybe you two are missing. But if you're not going to do that, get a book that you can work through with your potential spouse, or go through the toolkit. Have things that you're actually engaging, where you're asking the right questions, you're talking about the important things, so that you're not going to be caught off guard or surprised by anything. Right? Okay, mashallah. Oh, I saw that. Yeah, mashallah. Good, yeah. I'd recommend them. They also have, for those people that want, I think it ends up being a little bit cheaper than premarital counseling for people that have some financial constraints and things like that. FYI does have, like, I think it's 7 lessons of, like, you can pay for, and it's pretty economical for the most part, where it's like pre-recorded lessons that you can go through for premarital prep. And then I think it comes with 1 coaching session where they actually have somebody live to actually touch base with you too. So I highly recommend them. They're really solid, mashallah. Okay. Okay, so we talked about needs and values. I just put some values up here. There's so many different values, and people value different things. But some of the common things you see that are important to people are things like, you find people saying, like, I want somebody who's a strong provider, or I want somebody who's really loving and nurturing. I really want somebody that just, at a basic level, they have taqwa, like, that they're God conscious. And I will say, like, the taqwa, kind of across the board, should be a value for anybody who's like a Muslim that's engaged in their religion. Like, you want your spouse to have, like, the relationship with their creator, rather than it's just like the horizontal, like, between human to human. Like, if somebody is concerned about how they're acting and how they are with their creator, they're naturally going to be better with you, right? So somebody that's God conscious, I think, is really important. Spiritual compatibility is something for a lot of people. Somebody who listens well, somebody who doesn't raise their voice, trustworthiness, honesty. For some people, connection is really important. Like, sometimes things will align for some people on, the practical things, but they'll be like, just something here does not, like, I'm not able to talk to this person, or they're not, something about it doesn't feel natural, right? So some people need to have a basic level of connection, right? Obviously, to be in a lifelong marriage. Kindness, integrity, harmony, peace are things that some people value. Justice, spirituality. So many different needs and values, right? But thinking about for yourself, and you can even go online and just say, like, put in a, inventory of values, or like list of values, and just like go through it and see, like, okay, what things kind of ring for me as, like, okay, yeah, those are really important for me, right? Those are really important. I will say we have some guidance too from the Prophet ﷺ. Like, he says that that people marry for 4 reasons. Do people know what those 4 reasons are? Yeah. And what was the last one? Beauty. Yeah. So character is not mentioned in that one. There's another riwayah where character is mentioned, but yeah. So people will marry for wealth. They'll marry for beauty. They'll marry for like lineage, or like does a person come from a good family, or they'll marry for deen. And he says, choose the one, the deen, right? Because those other things, at best, they're just going to be during this life. But deen is going to be this life and the next one, inshallah, right? Like it's going to transcend beyond even just this plane. And it's going to be something that's actually more substantial, right? If you're going to have somebody that's actually concerned about their deen, that's going to be much more indicative of, inshallah, their character. There's another hadith, sister, that I think maybe you mentioned character, because I think when one of the women asked the Prophet ﷺ that asked the question, and he said, marry for deen and khuluq, right? So like deen and character. And it's interesting that he said both, right? Because sometimes people can externally have all the right things in the deen, but then the character is actually suboptimal. Like we unfortunately see that. It should be like an integrated whole, right? That's what the should be assumed, but especially it's interesting, like for women, I think too, like marry a man of good character, because the man is also going to be a person who's supposed to be the guardian and leader of the household. If he doesn't have good character, it's going to be tough, right? And even if you talk to a lot of teachers and scholars of Islam, and there'll be people who are very pious, obviously, and then they'll say, like, well, what if I have somebody who's like religious and they're hafiz of Quran and they're student of knowledge and all this stuff, but I noticed they had road rage and spoke poorly to like my brother or something like that. They'll be like, and then I have another person that he's not really that religious. Like he's trying. He says he wants to like pray 5 times a day. He's still struggling with it. But like his character is like really good. He treats my parents well. He treats everybody else well. Like he's somebody that's super honest and trustworthy. And sometimes they'll be like, marry the person that's not that religious, but like he's treating people better, right? Because you can't. It's hard to change raw materials. Like if somebody got to their adulthood and they're just like a mean person, yeah, they can change, but it's much harder to change that. Somebody that's like has a great character, but they're like struggling in their deen, well, they can learn their deen, and they can grow in that, inshallah, right? But that's why a lot of people say choose the character over, and it doesn't mean like you want certain religious aspects there, but like if somebody's struggling, as long as they're saying like I would like to, then they're not belittling the things of the religion, because that can be a flag. If people are like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, I don't do this, I don't do that, that's not a good sign. But if they're like, yeah, I would like to pray 5 times a day, I'm just really struggling with subh right now, or I'm struggling with Isha, or whatever it is, like they're struggling, but they want to, they have the intention to do it, you can work with that. But you can't, harder to work with somebody that like belittles anything of the deen, right? So just something to consider. Questions, comments? Communication. So communication is really important in marriage. And it's a process of like actually learning with your spouse about like how they communicate, how you can reach them. But there are some basics. There are basics that are helpful. Some things to do is like be present and attune, right? Full body listening. We know from the Prophet ﷺ that he would turn towards people when he was speaking to them. He would turn his whole body towards them when he was speaking to them. So full body listening is actually like a prophetic quality that you want to emulate. Like when you're in a relationship, it's easy to kind of you're just distracted and I'm on my phone now and I'm half listening. But no, like just take the time to be present when your spouse is talking to you. Right? Suspending judgment and defensiveness. This is a huge one, and it's a hard one too for people. We have sometimes the internal dialogue and assumptions that we make, but trying to put that on pause and getting more curious about, okay, well, what did that person, maybe I can ask a question compassionately, like, when you did this, like, just wanted to know, like, why did you do this, right? Getting more curious rather than, you always do this, I can't believe, you don't care about me, you're getting into the assumptions. Get more curious about, like, I noticed, like, you're like 20 minutes late picking me up from the airport, like, is everything okay? Or like, what was going on for you? And like, just don't make assumptions, Be curious. I think an attitude of curiosity is important. There's actually like a technique called compassionate inquiry where you're asking questions not from an interrogative place, but just actually getting from a place of curiosity. With gentleness, like, just like tell me a little bit more about like what your internal process was when you made this decision or you did that thing. It'd be helpful for me to know. Getting curious rather than making assumptions. And having a good opinion. So husn al-dhan is part of our tradition, to like try to assume good intent when you can. Right? And then using I statements is from like nonviolent communication is like we sometimes get into like, oh, you always do this, or why don't you do this, or you never care about this or that. If you're using you a lot, you're pointing the finger outward and you're blaming. So what you can do instead is like talk about your own self, your own experience. I noticed I felt uncared for when you didn't, wipe the counters after, you spilled that sticky thing on the counter. I just noticed that I felt like uncared for a little bit. But I'm just noticing my reaction, right? It's a way of communicating that it doesn't put the other person on the defense, right? Or I noticed like I felt angry when you said A, B, or C such thing, You can have a conversation, right? When you're talking about your own experience, you're not making assumptions about what the other person was doing. You can still talk about what they did, but not the assumption about their intention, right? So I statements helps with that. Some things to try to avoid, over talking to the point where like you don't give the other person a chance to like speak or engage, getting really defensive, like, somebody brings something up and you're just like trying to defend it, what you've done or said, trying to bring down the guard of defensiveness a little bit and engage when you can. Not putting off difficult conversations, right? So there's a balance again. Sometimes people need some time and space. Some personality types especially, they'll need a little bit of time to cool off before they can engage, but not just sweeping it under the rug and like never coming back to it again, saying like, you know what, I noticed right now I'm really charged, my blood is boiling, I'm pretty angry, I don't think I can talk about it right now. Can I take a bit of time and like, can we come back to the conversation in a couple hours? Something like that. Like not just putting it off, but saying like, giving a time where that person can check in with you again. Avoid fear of clashing. Like some people will never want to like bring up problems or something like that, or how they're feeling because they don't want to create conflict. That's also not the best way of operating because eventually you will feel resentment build up, right? And that's not really healthy for the relationship. You'll eventually, explode at some point, right? Or you'll just kind of internally implode, right? So being able to like express yourself is important, especially for the introverted types, learning to do that. Okay. Yeah, again, like the defensiveness and the, avoiding criticism, kind of they go together maybe. It's like to, ideally a person isn't criticizing all the time, but like when it does come up, try to, again, suspend that defensiveness that might arise. Oh, okay, avoid the four horsemen. This is what I was talking about here. Okay. So some of you might know John Gottman. He's like pretty big in the marriage and family therapy world, but he has like a love lab in Seattle. They do a lot of research on marriages, him and his wife. But they've identified like the 4 things that like really corrode relationships if they're continuously done and not addressed over a period of time. So it's criticism, like excessive criticism that's never like, it continues on. Contempt, this feeling of like, just, the other person's just like beneath me, or I can't, it just disgusts me or something. Resentment, where you're really holding all this anger inside, but you're not expressing it, but you're feeling like so angry and resentful of the other person. And then stonewalling, which is where you basically like shut down, like you stop engaging and talking to the other person. They say they want to talk, and you're just like, I don't want to talk about it, leave me alone. Or like you just don't even respond. They say something, and just like, that's a really unhealthy place to be if you get there, right? So things to like be aware of if like criticism, contempt, resentment, stonewalling are showing up. You wanna try to address it, mitigate it, find some resolution around those things. Because over time, they're indicators and predictors of divorce, if left unaddressed. Okay. Rights and responsibilities. Again, we're not going to, I took it out of this presentation actually because like, to get into all of it is quite a lot, and it really actually deserves like a class, to be honest. So people can go, like there's free classes that people can take actually on Seeker's Guidance if they're interested on, learning the rights and responsibilities of marriage. I think there's a couple free classes that are pretty useful. There's also like, playlists on YouTube that different scholars have kind of put together. So if there's a scholar that you know and trust that maybe has a compilation of those things, worth checking out and going through a playlist or a podcast or something. But yeah, I can say Seeker's Guidance website, if you go on there, or even if you just put it into a search and then say like marriage class. I think 3 of their classes should pop up, inshallah. But are there any, I guess, pressing questions around rights and responsibilities in marriage that people have that if I can, I'll answer, or if I'll say better find out from a scholar, I'll just kind of pivot that way as well. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's great to be able to impart the knowledge that you do have about it. Helps people to get prepared. So yeah, if parents are able to assist in that, really beautiful to see that happen. Anything else from anyone? I'm going to just check if anybody's messaging me about online. Okay, no, looks like nothing. All right, we're getting close. What I will say about the rights and responsibilities within Islam around marriage is that you want to look at some of the guiding principles, right? So like you want to hold the balance of like the letter of the law, so the actual things that are like the actual rights and responsibilities that are established, but balance it with the spirit of the law, which the spirit of the law is what? It's in the Quran. It's mawadda wa rahma, right? Like love and mercy. Love and mercy is like the foundation of a healthy marriage, right? So you don't want to make everything like a, like a checklist that you're like keeping tabs on, like, well, I'm doing all these things and I notice that like they're not doing these things, and certainly you have the right to your absolute rights, but actually like the things that are like agreed upon among the scholars are like very few things, right? And then you'll get differences of opinions on other areas of things, right? But the things that are actually your rights that are like really important, yeah, you have a right to those things. But if you're willing to forego any of those rights, not out of a place of like, because a person has the capacity, let's say. I'll use an example that's common in our modern day era. Is like sometimes women are now in professions where they're earning more than the man, okay? Let's say a couple are in a marriage and she's earning more and his income is not that much, and they chose to live in a certain neighborhood or something like that that's a little bit more costly, and she's like, I'm going to contribute towards this too because I wanted to be here, and I also, like, it's sadaqah for me, so I'm making my intention for sadaqah too. Like, I'm gaining sadaqah and I'm able to do it, and I'm willing to forego that right of like, yes, my husband, it's his duty to provide for the housing and the food and the clothing, but because I'm in the situation I am, and I would like to, be generous and increase in sadaqah, a person might make that choice. A person can make that choice for themselves. Or a man can, yeah, he has the right to his certain intimacy and things like that, but he recognizes that, like, okay, his wife has, different level of libido, and maybe is going through different hard things in her life and things like that. He's like, okay, maybe I'm gonna like just rein it in on my nafs a little bit, and I'll just like, compromise. Maybe I wanted a little bit more than I want, but because I want to be, I'm going to make that concession. Just some examples, right? But as long as it's being done from a place of goodwill, people can choose to do that. Be merciful with each other in the things and life circumstances that come up. And the reality is, may Allah protect us all from calamities, but like, hard things happen, life happens, marriage, you're on a journey with somebody else and things are happening. So you're going to be tested, right? How do you adjust and adapt to the tests that come through, whether they're financial or emotional or physical, you want to be cognizant of these things and be kind of the attitude of like love and mercy and like, mutual support. Right? So another guiding principle is like shura, like having consultation with your spouse is important. Generally speaking, like when you're making life decisions, it's good to be in touch with each other, discuss things, be on the same page, mutually agree to things is going to be much healthier than one person just kind of like going ahead and making decisions, without consulting. Like if a man wants to say, well, I'm the imam of the household and I get to, make the final, yeah, sure, like maybe you get to call the final shot on something, but if you don't want to consult like your wife and the well-being of your children or whatever like that, like you're just going to create difficulty for yourself, people are going to be unhappy or something like that. Do you really want that? It's not a good place to be. So generally, and we get that even from the Prophet ﷺ, like especially in the first marriage, like with Khadija, radiallahu anha, a lot of mutuality and consultation there, right, and comfort and bi-directional support. And then the final thing I put here is orf, or like custom, right? Like keep this in mind too as you're marrying, is like both you and your spouse are coming from a particular cultural context and way of doing things, and these things are like sometimes really hardwired in us, right? So like it's okay for people to marry across cultures and different experiences, but you need to have an understanding about how do you do certain things, right? And how will you compromise in certain things? Because it can be more challenging when you have very different cultures coming together. That's a reality. Or family cultures that are very different that are now coming together, right? So like knowing the custom and the way of doing things for yourself and the other person, like even ahead of time, is like, I think, important. And then like having respect for that. Like if you're choosing to be in a cross-cultural marriage or a cross-ethnic marriage, that you have awareness and acceptance over some of these different components, right? Because ideas about marriage, outside of the deen specified issues, you'll find a lot of things influenced by culture, right? That are not necessarily in contradiction with the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah. They might be just fine in line with it, but they're different ways of doing it. They're both maybe permissible ways of doing it, but one feels like very different for somebody than somebody else, right? Especially expectations around gender roles and stuff like that, right? Because like in Islam, like there's not, at least in the majority of schools of thought, like wife doesn't have to like clean and cook. It's not a fard on the wife to do that, but like a lot of people have that expectation, right? Being aware of these things. Bismillah. Okay, what should I look for in a potential spouse? Again, some of this will be personalized, but there's green flags and red flags, right? So the green flags, again, will reiterate character, and within that, taqwa, of course, like God consciousness. Being financially stable is a good sign. Emotional maturity, right? Ability to apologize, forgive, express oneself, engage with the other person. A desire to fulfill their responsibilities. Those are all good signs. Some not so great signs: immaturity, financial instability. If a person is a man, right, and they're trying to get married and they're like really in an unstable situation, it's harder, right? It's at least a flag. If they're disrespectful or have a hard time controlling their anger, that can be a flag. Love bombing. Has anybody heard that term? Love bombing? So like, this is when somebody's just showering somebody else with praise or gifts, or like just, even taking them on maybe, taking them out of fancy places, and there's a lot of promises and like of things to come, but you kind of want to slow down a little bit when that's happening. Like, why is it, even though it could feel really good, maybe somebody would be like, oh my gosh, they're spending so much money on me, and they're getting me all these things, and they're telling me how beautiful I am all the time, and I love it. But it's kind of like a flag. Like, you more want to talk about the substantial things and not be just actually, like in the courting process, you want to actually talk about the real things and not just be like in an infatuation relationship. Yes, yeah, certainly in the courting period, it's a sign sometimes of we don't want to put people in boxes, but people that tend to have more of the characteristics of like, it can be a sign of like narcissistic traits if somebody is like early on just trying to like dump on somebody, right? Without actually like, you're not talking about this substantial things and things like that. That's a person just showering somebody with gifts and praise and all this stuff. You kind of want to like, oh, at least flag that for a second. Like, okay, slow down. In the marriage, I mean, some people are more just sanguine temperament, and maybe they're giving and loving, and they just always are doing that. Maybe, I mean, that's a different story. If it's like continuous and it's consistent or something like that. But people that are like dumping all of a sudden and then restricting and these kinds of things, you want to be careful of. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an excellent question. So she was saying for those online that like sometimes it's natural, people are putting their best foot forward, their best face forward when they're getting to know somebody. So how do you decipher between what is a flag and what is actually just like pretty normative, like a person trying to show themselves in a positive light? So it would be some of these other flags that we're actually mentioning too, right? If you're noticing signs of immaturity, for example, or that people have a temper, or they're treating the people around them poorly, or there's some, maybe even saying things to you sometimes, But the difference, I guess, between love bombing and just putting a good face forward is like, is this person, um, is that all that they're doing to kind of win me over? Or are we actually like, we are talking about the nitty gritty stuff too, about, what are our expectations about finances and household duties and chores and our personalities, and we're actually talking about substantial things, and we're talking about religion, and we're talking about our families and how we're going to navigate boundaries with families while staying in connection with them, and we're talking about all the issues, right? And we've worked through like a book and these things. Or is it just like that somebody's not giving me clear answers on anything, and they're just showering me with praise and taking me out here and there and this kind of thing? You'll get a sense of it, right? You get a feeling for something, whether somebody is like, they're able to talk about the things, or they're just kind of trying to just impress you, you know? But yeah, you have to tease it out a little bit, and this is where I also encourage people to have your most trusted friends and trusted family members meet the person, right? Because you want to see like what do your good friends and family members think of the person also, right? And this is also where, again, culturally this will be different. Some people are like, they're not so big on like going out and the word dating is misleading because people have different ideas about what dating is, but like, permissible for people to go in public spaces together. And I actually do encourage that for at least this cultural time and place, for people to go out in public places with their potential spouse and see how do they treat the cash register and the waitress and my cousin when we're hanging out, and the little kid that like stumbled along the way, like how are they engaging with the people around them? You don't want to just like have your potential spouse be like, you only see them and you've never seen them with anybody else and you don't know anything about them and you just believe everything that they tell you about them. No, like it's good to like get a sense of that. So getting that perspective from your own friends, and then also I will say like, how are they with their friends, right, and their family, and being able to have the opportunity to even talk to and engage with that person's family and friends. Really helpful, right? You can feel these things out. It's harder to do it when it's just like you and the other person and nobody else is seeing anything. That's where people get into trouble. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. It comes up all the time. Like, what's the time period that people should court or like ask questions? Honestly, I can't say that there's necessarily a specific amount of time because it's going to look different depending on like what's also the pace of your communication. Are you working through a book together? Are you getting premarital counseling? Are your families meeting? There's so many other variables that would determine how long that process looks like, you know. But I would tell people like the general feel of it should be not short, not quick, but also not long and drawn out. Like you want to take as much time as you need to feel like you get the answers to all of your questions, and that you get a felt sense of like, I understand this person's heart at a basic level. Like I trust them and I get a sense of who they are. You want to give yourself enough time for that. But similar to that, I would say like every one of your interactions should be intentional. Like I don't recommend for people to just go out just for the purpose of hanging out. It should be like, oh, I'm going out and my intention is like, yeah, we're going to get together, we're going to have a meal, be able to talk, but we're going to talk about some of these things in the book. Or, yeah, I'm going out in this specific setting so that I can actually get a sense of like, oh, how are they around their family? Or, oh, how are they around their friends? You don't want to just like hang out to hang out and just be shooting the breeze and talking about chit chat and those kind of things. Have your conversations be purposeful, intentional, and, you know, get to know each other. Like, you really get to know each other. And I think that's more what I would emphasize rather than a specific timeline. Because it could be a few weeks. You know, if people are like really engaged, it could be potentially like a few weeks. But other people may need several months, you know, because of circumstances sometimes with family situations and international and stuff like that. Might be, you know, over a year or whatever, a couple years sometimes, and people's situations are different. But I don't recommend drawing it out. You know, when you know that you want to marry somebody and you feel confident, like, it's good to get married. But you also don't want to make it too quick. And you don't want to feel like you're rushing it or that you don't have clarity internally for yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. 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 Yeah, this is, I mean, again, with time and communication, you can get a sense of like how important is the dean to somebody, and how important is like the dean in a holistic sense important to somebody. Because there's some people that just like the externalities are enough for them. They're like, I pray 5 times a day, I fast, I give my zakah, and you know, but if I'm cutting somebody off on the road to Jummah, like I don't really think about that, or you know, but you know, so you'll get a sense as you're hanging out with people too about like how do they carry themselves in their social lives and their daily lives. It gives you a sense of like their character. So character can be an indicator of having taqwa, right? Um, so that's one thing to look at. Like look at somebody's character rather than the external manifestations of the religion, right? Because somebody can check all the boxes of like doing all the things that they need to do, and they're important to do, but you know, if they're actually like their character is suspect, or it's, you know, you're raising eyebrows for you, that's an indicator that like, yeah, maybe there's something deficient there, right? Internally. Because taqwa is really, it's an internal mechanism that's at play, where you're no longer doing things for um, how things look on the outside. You're now more concerned about like, how is my heart with Allah, right? And like, I'm mindful about like having prophetic character wherever I go, with whoever I'm with, like that consciousness, that awareness, that caring, these are indicators. I will loop back to the point you said about the timeline. There's some people that also will just like, if people struggle with self-doubt or they've been in a, let's say, a difficult relationship before, sometimes they're going to need a little bit of extra time just to make sure, right? So sometimes the point is that you want to give yourself the sufficient amount of time for you to feel internally that you have all your questions answered and that you don't have any reservations about who the person is internally. Like there's a basic sense of trust that's settled in. Okay. Okay. So some common sources of conflict that will arise in marriage that people should be aware of. It's helpful to know ahead of time so that people talk about some of these issues, or at least aware of some of them. Right? So finances, sexual intimacy, in-law issues, and matters of deen. I asterisk those ones because they like constantly coming up in couples therapy for me. Like it's just a constant, and the top two are the top two. Like it's just constantly around finances and intimacy, right? So these are like recurrent things that are happening in relationships. Also, in-law situations is very important, and like finding compatibility religiously is important too, right? Um, and then there's the other considerations of personality, cultural differences, raising children that will get in the way as well. But these are common sources of conflict that you can talk through. Now, around matters of intimacy, obviously you cannot, ahead of like being in a marriage, you can't really go into details or specifics, but there's two things that you can basically gauge ahead of time. One is like, does that person, do they recognize that it's an important part of marriage? Like there's an acknowledgement, like, yeah, the physical intimacy is an important part of marriage, right? There's an understanding and acceptance of that. Do they have that? And then number two is, are they willing to work on it, right? Is there an openness to like, you have the conversation that like, yeah, we know we can't talk about the specifics ahead of time. A lot of it's going to be experiential as we get into it, but are we both willing to work on it, right? Because you don't know. Like you're not going to know all the things until you actually get into it. But is there an openness? Do they recognize it as an important part of marriage? And are they willing to work at it and work on it and talk about it and work through it, right? Those are the two things that you can gauge from a person ahead of time, and make sure that you're asking those questions. Those two things are there, a person's understanding of it and willing to work on it, that's the foundation that you need, right? Yeah, any questions around any of this stuff? Okay. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here, good. Some people ask, how can I get married, right? So, obviously there's different ways. Family and friend connection, sometimes that works for people. Social gatherings. There's now matrimonials. ICCH does matrimonial events. There's going to be one coming up, I think, for a little bit of an older cohort on the 25th of January for 33 to 25, or 33 to 45. But they have other ones that they'll be doing again for the younger cohort again, I think in the early 20s to the early 30s. So, check out those things if you can. You can also, some people like to go directly to like matchmakers that like actually give more catered, like specified bio data. It's also like extremely confidential where like no other community members are seeing them, things like that, and they're matching them with other, potentials. So some people seek that out. There's a lot of online matrimonials now. A lot of them are honestly like not the most quality, and I've heard a lot of horror stories from clients and others in the community around navigating the internet world and the online dating apps and things like that. So it's a mixed bag. There's some websites that are a little bit more reputable. I will say the ones that actually ask you to pay a little bit something better than the free ones, because some people are just getting on there, they're not that serious, and they're just messing around, right? So online things can be an option for some people as well. Yeah? Yeah, I mean, certainly you're correct. There's more challenges when people don't have the family and friend connections in that network. There's going to be less options, obviously, and then also if you've had a difficult time with the online scene, I would say, you can try out like in-person matrimonial events or seeking out Muslim matchmakers. A little bit more expensive, I think, to go that route because it's more catered and specified, but I'm pretty sure there are people out there. I should probably look into, because I actually I haven't searched for Muslim matchmakers, but I should probably actually add that to my resource list. Might be worthwhile to seek that out, because that could be a potential for some people, right? Yeah, yeah. There's people out there that are doing that work. locally, I'm not sure that we have that, but in some of the larger cities, I know that is taking place. But matrimonial events like the one that's coming up with ICCH or ones that will be coming up also in the future, inshallah. And then also Seattle is a good option, I think, for a lot of people locally because Seattle will put on pretty comprehensive workshops and events around matrimonial events. They sometimes do whole weekend workshops where they have like an introductory night of like education, and then they'll go through like the fiqh of marriage on like the second day, and then the third day they'll have the actually matrimonial event where you're meeting people. So Seattle is doing that, I think, like if not quarterly, at least twice a year in different communities, and even maybe more than one communities engaging those things. So Seattle's not too far of an option to engage some of that stuff as well. But it is more challenging, right, without family and friends. And if people are turned off to the online thing, yeah, it's tough. I can't blame people that get like, you kind of have to have like thick skin if you're doing the online thing, because like you're going to be going through a lot of a lot of trial and error, right? May Allah make it easy for all of us, for everyone out there. But yeah, I mean, it's my wife and I, we got connected through a mutual friend, so it can be helpful to the people that you know sometimes. And then just as we're wrapping up here, just some resources. Again, I mentioned Family and Youth Institute, so check out their premarital questionnaire. It's free online. Great, and then even their marital prep toolkit. Lots of great resources on there. One book, there's so many books now on Muslim marriages, so many books, mashallah. Like a few years ago, like there was only a few, and now there's like so many. But if there's one book that I would say I've come across that's the most comprehensive and well done, I would say Healthy Muslim Marriage. It's actually written by a Muslim scholar in the UK, but he consulted a bunch of therapists in his process of writing the book. So it's like solid on the Islamic front, because he's a scholar in his, himself, but he engaged a lot of therapists and counselors and coaches in the process. So he's like really, really well done. I was really impressed with that book. And then self-knowledge resources, like there's all kinds of stuff out there. I mentioned the Alexander Carberry for the temperaments. So he has a Know Yourself book, which is like one that just gives a short overview of each temperament, and then he has individual books on each temperament just for itself. So those can be really fun, helpful things to kind of engage in, inshallah. The Enneagram I mentioned, the 9-part personality type, is another resource. There's the Love Languages free online quiz. There's the Attachment Style free online quiz. And then the Big 5 personality test as well. All of those you can go through them, free online inventories that you can complete and get that feedback. But yeah, for real self-knowledge, I mean, it is like reading is a better way than doing online quizzes, but online quizzes is like still it gives you a sense. It gives you a sense of things. So that's all that I have, alhamdulillah. So we just have a couple of minutes. If there's any pressing questions, we can take 1 or 2 questions, but otherwise we'll just wrap up and get ready for the salah, inshallah. Any final questions or comments? Jazakallah khair for all of you coming out. Appreciate it, and I pray that Allah facilitates all that is best for all of you. We pray that Allah makes the path easy towards marriage for everyone, and anybody who wanted to be here that couldn't be here. We pray that Allah guides them to what is best for them, and we ask that this gathering be a means of benefit for ourselves and others. And we pray that be a means of getting closer to Allah and His Messenger. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wa la asr inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Subhanaka bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.